like I say, those people were all related, and then we were kind of related to them.
Didn't your house get raided once?
Oh yeah, we got that was for home brew. That wasn't for whiskey. That was for beer. Yeah, my daddy used to make a little beer, but I mean that was just for personal use.
Mm-hmm.
Just you and 6 or 8 friends would get together and drink till you pass out with that beer. And of course, I'd taste it, but I didn't like the taste of it. And he'd make a big churn full of it, and they'd have a big party, and then he'd go along for a month or two, and he might decide to make another churn of home brew, or he'd make wine. That's just the way you did in the country back in those days, because Tuscaloosa County was dry.
So the whole state was dry.
You couldn't buy booze. Well, I didn't know about the state. I just knew about Tuscaloosa County. You couldn't buy booze or anything like that. And that's why bootleggers, there was so many bootleggers, because that's the only booze you had. And
yeah, that state was dry till like the mid-60s.
But that was kind of interesting to be around those people all, and they were on both sides of us.
But the revenuer showed up at your place one time, right?
Yeah, well, they come and got, they took my daddy to jail. They came and of course, they come in the house, they had a search warrant. I think we talked about that, and they poured out his whiskey and took him to jail. Had to bail him out, but...
Didn't they break everything in the house with whole water?
yeah. But, that my daddy, he didn't take that too hard. I mean, it's just a way of life,
Mm-hmm.
They just come, and then you go down there, and you didn't have any money, but you signed a property deed,
mm-hmm.
For bail. And if it wasn't enough, if they didn't think your property was enough to grant you bail, you get somebody else to go down and sign their deed. You're going to show up for court. There was no such thing as jumping bail or anything like that. I mean, where are you going to jump to? But yeah, he did that. But I mean, he got off with a fine, and that was fine. But we was talking about making that moonshine, and my daddy was a coal miner, but he drank a little bit. He was a weekend drinker,
mm-hmm.
especially. He drank a lot on the weekends, but he would come home from the coal mines, and of course, working down in the slope mines is really dirty. You're all covered up with coal dust and all that. He would have to have a drink of whiskey every day. He said he got to have that to clear his throat, and he kept a 5-gallon jug of whiskey in the corn crib all the time. Of course, we knew when we go down and shell corn and go to the mill or anything, that 5-gallon whiskey would be down there.
Mm-hmm.
He'd go down there and he'd pour him up a bottle of a gallon jug or something and take it to the house, and then he would drink out of it. Usually kept it out by the water bucket. He'd pour him a dipper full of that and drank it, and get him a drink and chase it with a drink of water. But one time my brother, he was just a little bit off. and my daddy went down there to pour him up some of that whiskey out of that 5-gallon jug, and the jug was empty, and he wanted to know what happened to his whiskey, and he wanted to ask me. I have no idea what happened to it. He wanted to ask my brother. My brother said, "You don't need to be drinking that stuff. I poured it out." And of course my daddy had a fit about it, but when you're dealing with my brother, there's no point in getting too excited about it, because you ain't going to change him. That's just his way. Well, it wasn't 3 weeks later till my brother got caught at that whiskey still.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when my daddy one day had to go down to Tuscaloosa to the courthouse and bail him out. And my brother was still in high school at that time. And my daddy said, "Lord have mercy, that boy." Said, 2 weeks ago he poured my whiskey out in the damn yard, and now then I'm down here in county jail trying to bail his ass out. And then because of the way they did in a whiskey steal, It depends on how many gallons of whiskey they figured it was in that still.
Mm-hmm.
If they poured out, and that I think that was a 600-gallon of whiskey that they poured out of that still. Well, they charge $9 tax a gallon.
Mm-hmm.
So it's $5,500.
Whoops.
Now, fine. Of course, they charge each one of them with that. And I don't think my brother ever paid his part. After he got out of there and he got out of high school and he came to Chicago, and I don't think he ever paid it. But the federal ABC, alcohol beverage control or whatever it was called, they had a lien against him for that whiskey that they poured out of that whiskey still. And my brother had no idea how to make whiskey or anything else. And he wasn't even a helper. I mean, he wasn't even good at helping and stuff like that. He was just a bystander, but it didn't make any difference. He was there and they got him and they charged him and all that. But that was just, part of the life that we lived, living in Vance, Alabama.
Now, your dad never drove, right? He couldn't drive.
No, he drove one time.
Uh-huh.
He bought that A model. He bought that from Mr. T.C. Martin. He was a mail carrier. And that A model, he had drove that A model delivering the mail for years. And when he got ready to sell it, my daddy paid him $25 for that A model, and Mr. T.C. brought that over to the house. We lived there. There was a big hill come down to our house, and parked it on that hill. And I remember, I didn't know, nobody knew how to drive in our family. And my daddy, he didn't know how to drive, but he got drunk, and he decided he was going to drive that A model. So he gets in there, and of course we get in there with him, me and my brother. We push it off down the hill and starts. He gets it going down the road, and he's meeting a car coming the other way. It's dirt road, and he starts hollering, "There's two of them! There's two of them!"
He's in trouble.
He runs off in a big mud hole, and it's just stuck right in the damn middle of the mud hole. We had to get out of the car, mud and stuff up over. It's cold as hell, and up over. We had to go get my brother-in-law, Manly Tubbs, come over and fish that thing out and bring it back to the house and park it up on the hill. But that's the only time that that I know of that he ever attempted to drive it. But I would do it. Once my daddy would go to work, he worked night shift. He'd leave the house about 11 o'clock in the morning, and he'd walk over to the store, and then somebody would pick him up and take him to West Blockton. He worked at the coal mines in West Blockton, and he didn't come home till like 12 o'clock at night. But he would, once he would go, I figured I can drive that thing, I got this thing all figured out. So we had a black man that worked for us sometimes, Jim Pinkert, and he was old, and so we would go out and I'd get that thing, get it all ready to fire up. Of course, it had a hand crank, but I couldn't crank it that way. We'd push it down that hill and drop the clutch on it and start it. Run. Well, if it didn't start, then I had to go get the mule, hook the mule to it, pull it back up the hill, and push it back down the hill again until I once I got the hang of it, I could start it every time. But a funny story about that was Jim Pinkert was pushing, he was going to push it off, because you'd have to get it started down the hill. And he was old, and he had a hold of the bumper, and he pushed it, and I dropped the clutch on, and it started and took off. I think I might have had it in second gear. I wasn't sure of anything at that time. And he started, and Jim is hanging on to the bumper, and I'm flying down the road, and he's hanging on to that bumper.
Oh, that's bad.
But it was a dirt road, it just dirtied him up a little bit. But I'd run it up, and he finally turned loose. I'd run it over there in the field somewhere and turn it around and come back, and that's how I learned how to drive. I would I would run that thing around till I could figure out what the gears was, where the clutch was. And it was a unique car.
Did it have a spark advance on the steering?
Yeah.
That kind of an A model?
Yeah, up here, and it had gravity flow. You know, the gas tank was mounted in front of the windshield, and there was a gravity flow.
Above the engine.
Yeah, you put some gas in it, and it would flow down automatically into the carburetor. It was, of course, the old tires and stuff on it. We'd have to pump them up with a hand pump or something. If it ever went flat, they had boots in them and everything else. But that was always unique, trying to figure that thing out. But that was my first experience learning how to drive. Later on in life, I don't know, I might have been 10 or 12 years old then. But later on in life, after my mother got sick, we had to have a car for her to go take her chemo and all that, because we lived 25 miles from town. And so she went and bought a car. And she didn't know how to drive, but they drove the car to Vance, and then, of course, I wasn't old enough, but I knew how to drive, and I got in the car. And then I would take her for chemo treatments at that time, and they weren't called chemo at that time, it was radiation.
Mm-hmm.
I would take her, and they would do that radiation, and it was awful. I would just have to wait till they got it all done, and I would bring her back home.
How old were you then? 14?
Yeah, probably 14 years old. But maybe it might have been younger, I'm not sure. But she passed away when I was 15, in February of 1956. She finally got so bad, of course we lived in a house that didn't have central heat and running water and all that. We just didn't have the facility. Her final days, we readmitted her. I took her down. Of course, my dad didn't have anything to do with it because he just wasn't anything. He just didn't get involved in stuff like that. I took her down to Druid City Hospital in Tuscaloosa and took her to the emergency room, and they admitted her to the hospital. She was in there, and she wasn't in there very long. She passed away. So, but that was, we were just a bunch of young kids, and we still had 4 kids at home. Patricia and Faye and Buck and myself, and we had a milk cow. Nobody knew, didn't want to wash clothes, wash dishes. My 2 younger sisters, they weren't worth a flip for doing anything. They just sat around waiting for somebody else to do something for them. My brother, he couldn't do nothing, so I was having to do everything. If the clothes got washed, I'd have to take them over there to the spring and pour up water and use a rub board and wash them and hang them out on the line. And if there's any cooking that got done, I'd have to do that. Tote water for my daddy to take a bath. And of course, the milking the cow was a whole big problem, trying to go to school and work. Of course, I was working at the school, doing the cleaning, building fires, doing stuff like that at the Vance school at that time. My brother and I were getting paid a little bit of money, but couldn't keep up with all of it. My schoolwork went downhill because I wasn't going to school. I think I only went to school about a third of the time that year after my mother died. And I don't even know if I passed or what. I missed so many days, it didn't make me any difference. The only thing I was looking for was a way out. And as soon as I seen a way out, I packed up and left. And when I say I packed up, what I had on was all I had, and what money I had in my pocket was zero. I didn't have any money. I just hit the road and didn't go back for a long time. But I did, in one Chicago, I had a couple of relatives that lived in Chicago, and, you know, I would bunk in their house or somewhere around there, and then, of course, I got a job getting paid by the day, you know, $1 an hour. And as soon as I got that
that's
job,
what I got paid my first job.
as soon as I got that job, I bunked in with another guy, Garland Johnson, and we rented a 2-room apartment for $12. I think we were paying $12 a week. He would pay $6 and I'd pay $6, and so that was where I lived until I got married. And it was in the ghetto, but that was okay. You can flip it off now.
Alrighty.